And with me now is the Conservative Party's foreign affairs critic, Michael Chong. Mr. Chong, good to see you.
Good to be here.
You and your party have long criticized Canada's participation in the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Now, the minister saying yesterday she's not ruling out any outcome in the government's review. What's your reaction when you hear that?
Well, we've long called on the government first not to join the bank and then subsequently to withdraw from it. I think Mr. Pickard's resignation demonstrated what we've long known, which is that the bank is a tool to promote Beijing's authoritarian form of governance throughout the Indo-Pacific region. And for that reason, we think the government should make a decision to withdraw from the bank and repatriate the public money they've invested in it.
Now, the bank says it actually welcomes the Canadian review. They put out a statement saying they'll be cooperating fully and demonstrating transparency. The AIIB is actually promising its own internal review of those allegations from Bob Pickard and his resignation. Do you have any confidence in that process?
I don't. I think the entire structure of the bank is to play a rival to other banks that have been long established, such as the bank proposed by Japan, the Asian Development Bank some decades ago that does work in the Indo-Pacific region, such as the World Bank that's been long established in Washington that does a lot of work around the world. Beijing didn't like the fact that these institutions were based on fundamental principles about a belief in freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. And as a result, they decided to establish their own bank that would promote their form of governance throughout the region, an authoritarian model that is a threat to Western democracies. And so I think fundamentally our membership in the bank works against not only our interests and our values, and that's something that is shared by many others, including Global Affairs Canada. The advice that the Deputy Minister, Marta Morgan, then provided to the government several years ago was that this bank was fundamentally at odds with fundamental Canadian values and interests. But it's not advice the government's taken, and here we are now at this point where they're finally reacting to a crisis.
And so I know you're not in the government, so you're not going to speak for them, but you mentioned your party has called for a full Canadian withdrawal, a repatriation of funds. The House Finance Committee has also said Canada should withdraw. You mentioned Global Affairs Canada as well. Why do you think there is a reluctance at the top of the government of Canada?
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, Global Affairs advice was that the principles on which the bank was based was fundamentally at odds with the principles on which Canada is based on. I think the government just bullheadedly decided to proceed with the bank because they wanted to broaden and deepen ties naively with the People's Republic of China. And I think the other important point to make here is that the bank has barely begun its work. It's in essentially a startup phase. It has vast ambitions much beyond what they're currently doing, and it has ambitions to be many, many times larger than what it is now. And in doing so, I think would have a much more malevolent footprint throughout the Indo-Pacific region. And for that reason, it's imperative that we withdraw now before it becomes a much bigger problem later.
Okay, staying with China, I want to quickly shift to what we've heard this week at the Procedure Committee on your question of privilege, including what we heard from the Prime Minister's former interim National Security and Intelligence Advisor, David Morrison. Testifying on foreign interference, he says the CSIS 2021 memo on Chinese threats, in his words, was meant for awareness and not as a spur to action. What's your reaction to that testimony?
Well, I think clearly the government knew for many years that there was a PRC consular official in Toronto by the name of Mr. Wei Zhou that was actively collecting information on the family of myself in order to further target me, and was collecting information to target other parliamentarians. I think that information was relayed to all points within the Government of Canada, including Global Affairs, and I think that should have prompted action right then and there to expel this particular individual from Canada. It shouldn't have taken a report in the Globe and Mail to have done that. So clearly, the government isn't taking seriously national security issues. If they had, they would have taken action many years ago to counter some of these foreign interference threat activities.
Okay, one final question for you on this. We also heard at that committee the RCMP saying that they have investigations underway, including an investigation into the allegations involving yourself and your family. What more can you tell us on that process?
Well, as this is an ongoing investigation, I'm not going to be commenting on that matter. But what I will say more broadly is that it shouldn't take a whistleblower releasing information leading to reports in the national media for the government to have taken action on my case and on so many other cases. This should have happened many years ago. There have been four or five committees of the House of Commons that over the last several years have produced at least 5 reports that have heard from hundreds of witnesses, producing over 1,900 pages of evidence, producing over 30 recommendations to the government about how to combat these foreign interference threat activities from the People's Republic of China here in Canada, and yet nothing, very little, if nothing, has happened. And so, Parliament needs to get the job done. The government needs to release information to Parliament. When Parliament produces these reports with recommendation, the government needs to treat them seriously rather than responding in a crisis fashion when it ends up on the front page of national newspapers.
All right, Michael Chong, Foreign Affairs Critic for the Conservative Party of Canada. Thank you for this.
Thank you.